Thank you, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I have a bit of a cold. I'll tell you how I got it. Most teachers are Democrats, is that right? We're at risk of offending the Republican or two that might be here. Uh, uh, my schedule worked out that I had a wedding in Denver. My cousin got married. He lost his first wife and he remarried, and I wanted to go to that wedding on Saturday. And my wife said, "Well, if we're going to go to Denver, let's go to Chicago," because my wife's from Chicago, and they've got a summer home there on a little lake. And so we went to the wedding Saturday and traveled Sunday and Monday. That put us in northern Illinois, right on the Wisconsin border, on Tuesday. Yeah, you're shaking your head. Well, I was convinced that this election was going to be really close and that I might help make a difference. So I volunteered. I spent all day Tuesday up in Wisconsin. I got assigned, I called the headquarters and I said I was in Illinois and I'd like to come help. Coming out from Utah, I'd like to help. And they assigned me to Janesville, Wisconsin, which is just across the border there, in from the lake a little bit. And I worked two neighborhoods in Janesville getting out the vote. And I'd tell people, this election might be settled by one vote, and it might be yours. So anyway, I was working too hard on Tuesday. And Tuesday evening, I came down with a sore throat, and I've had the sniffles ever since. But it was all for a good cause. A waste of time, as it turns out, but a good cause. So that's just by way of anecdote, just to get started. I have done several presentations here, and they've all been things that are fairly easy for me to do. This time, it's a more specific topic than I've had before here, specifically literature, but within literature, filial piety, or filial piety, and within filial piety, literature. You're going to have filial piety and art here next, and I'm just really happy to be sharing the podium with Professor Kim, my old friend. I don't see her very often. Her husband's a professor of literature and a great friend of mine. I enjoy seeing them at conferences and such once every 2 or 3 years or something like that. So I'm pleased to share the podium with her. She'll be up next after my 2 hours. So this is a more specific topic than some I've dealt with before, which means I had to do a little bit more preparation. Some of the topics I've done here have been of such a general nature I can do them with my eyes closed. Topics I'm very familiar with, but this one I had to do a little bit of background work because it was a very specific topic, and it worked out to be very interesting. I learned some things about filial piety that I hadn't known that are going on in Korea today. Now, Mrs. Chia mentioned that we're focusing on the Chosǒn Dynasty, but I'm going to touch a little bit on contemporary Korea as well, because I think you all might be interested in contemporary issues and how filial piety plays out today as well as traditionally. So we'll look at both. So let's see. Where's my clicker? Here we go. So we're off and running. When you translate the Korean word or the Chinese word into English, the Korean word is hyo, and the Chinese word is xiao. And you say, well, what is hyo? What is xiao? And the answer is filial piety. That sounds like an English word, but it's not a significant word to you. You don't know what filial piety means. It's really substituting a foreign concept for another foreign concept. A filial piety is not a natural term in English. It's a contrived term to explain hyo. And I'll use the Korean word hyo throughout much of the discussion today. And realize when I say hyo, I mean filial piety. And when I mean filial piety, I mean hyo. And I want you to get inside the term hyo. and understand what it is, so that when you say and teach your students filial piety, it means something. Now, if it weren't filial piety, if we didn't use that odd term, what would it be? What term would be a more natural term in English? And respect for one's parent is a good term. Respect. You can tie in with the biblical tradition and call it honoring one's parents. I mean, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land, the commandment says. So it's very similar to this idea of honoring one's parents, but it's more complicated. It's deeper than that, actually. So I'm going to use the term hyo at times and try to help you get inside this term so you know what it really means, so it's not just an alien concept of filial piety, whatever that means. Filial, let's dissect that term just a little bit. Let's deconstruct that term a little. What does filial mean? Piety, you probably understand. Do you have a positive image of piety in your mind? You might think someone who's pious is a bit, maybe that's too much. We don't prize piousness in our society. That's considered kind of an extremist position in a lot of ways. So piety maybe doesn't have the most positive connotation for you, although this should have a very positive connotation. It's a very positive concept. Filial, the root word of filial is line. It's the same word as not these kind of light bulbs, filament. A filament in a light bulb is a line that becomes electrically charged. It's the line. It means the line from the ancestors down to the parent to the child. So it's the being pious or circumspect or honoring this line that you've inherited as a child in the household. Is it the Marriage of Figaro or Rigoletto? One of the operas has the daughter dies. I guess it's Rigoletto. Is it Rigoletto? Where when the daughter dies, Rigoletto sings, "Mi figlia, mi figlia, mi figlia." My daughter, my daughter, my daughter. You see, and so that's simply what this filial piety means. It simply means child, or the inheritor of the line that descends from the great-grandfathers to the grandfather to the father to the child. And then the line is going to go on with the next generation of children that are born. So that's what the filial means. It means really just a child. And piety means this respectful, honoring attitude. It's a core concept in Confucianism. Absolutely core. If you were to say, what is Confucianism in one word, a Confucian might respond, hyo. They might also respond in, this term of mutual respect or human-heartedness or benevolence. Those are the two core concepts of Confucianism. If you can reduce a major religion to one word, in Confucianism would be either in, this benevolence, or hyo. And in the same way that if you reduced Buddhism to one word, what's the one word for Buddhism? Mercy. Mercy. If you reduce Christianity to one word, what is it? Love. Yeah. If you reduce Islam to one word, what is it? Submission. Submission. Islam means submission, to submit. And so in a similar sort of vein, if Confucianism is reduced to one word, it might be hyo, it might be in. But you start off your text, when you study your texts, the first text you read as a child in the Confucian tradition is the Hyogyung, the classic of Hyo. And it's a simple text, and that's where you start. The next text you might read in Confucian classics would be the Mencius. Mencius, as you know, do you, was a disciple of Confucius, lived after Confucius's time, but had a similar background to Confucius. He would go and visit kings and try to teach them the way. And Mencius was very clear-cut. And you like Mencius because he doesn't waste any verbiage. He's very clear on what the doctrine is. And he has this very famous quotation, "Never has there been one who has Hyo toward one's parents who has not been loyal to the king." So Hyo is the beginning point. And very often when we say, what is Confucianism? What is Confucianism in a nutshell? Well, it's this human-heartedness, it's this filial piety, but it's also a social set of values. Korean Confucians, Chinese Confucians, they're often very quick to say it's not a religion. There is no God figure. There is no next life, although the core ceremony is ancestor ceremonies for the ancestors that are in the next life. But in Confucianism, they're not concerned about the next life. Why? Because the disciples asked Confucius at one time, what about the next life? In Buddhism, in other traditions they knew, there is a next life. Buddhists know all about the next life. Buddhists can tell you everything about the next life. They can tell you about heaven and hell and punishment and reincarnation and all of this. What do the Confucians say about the next life? While you do not yet understand this life, don't worry about the next life. So Confucianism is officially agnostic about the next life. We just don't know. The ancestors go there, we know that. We do ceremonies for the ancestors that are there, we know that. But where they are, what they're doing, anything about it, officially we don't know. We don't go there. And Confucians will not even speculate about that. We just don't know. Interesting, huh? And in a similar vein, Confucius was asked about spirits. The question was, well, what about spirits? And what did Confucius say? Stay away from spirits. Now, there's lots of spiritual worship that was going on at the time of Confucius. There's Buddhist practice. There's all sorts of spiritual things with concern about spirits. And we know the ancestors go on to someplace, and we do ceremonies for the ancestors, and the ancestors come and partake of the food, and then we feast on the food. They eat the spiritual essence, and we eat the physical essence of the food. So we know that there are spirits. But when Confucius was asked, what about spirits? It's a good question. Master, tell me about the spirits. What do they do? Where are they? What is it like? What did Confucius say? Stay away from spirits. So these key religious elements of the next life and of spirits after death, Confucianism is officially, doctrinally, dogmatically agnostic. We don't go there. We don't go there. It's not a subject for discussion. Okay? Those are the ground rules. Okay, so don't ask me anything about the next life. Don't ask me anything about spirits. We don't know about that. So as we see from this quotation from Mencius, that Hyo, this filial piety concept, this relationship with your parents, is the first step toward loyalty. And Confucianism is concerned about the functioning of the state. And the key element for the state to function is to be loyal to the king. And one of the worst things you can do is to be disloyal. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on here. the opposite of loyalty. And so I'll talk a little bit about loyalty as a coterminous concept with hyo. They're parallel concepts. You can hardly talk about hyo without talking about loyalty, and you can't talk about loyalty without talking about hyo. And if you're loyal to the sovereign, you are hyo to your parents. Okay? So you see how it works? And are you comfortable now with me saying hyo instead of filial piety? Does that help you to get inside of this? I want to make this foreignness seem familiar. Okay? So that's what I would like to do with this idea of hyo. Loyalty you have no trouble with. Loyalty, you know what loyalty is. It's the same thing that we would understand as loyalty. But we don't have quite the concept of this loyalty in the family as you do in the concept of hyo. Monuments. If you go to the Korean countryside and you visit a village, an old traditional village, if it's a village that's worth its salt, my mother used to say that, not worth its salt. Salt was a precious commodity in the old days. There was a monopoly on salt that the government controlled. Anyway, if a village is worth its salt, it has a monument, maybe 2, sometimes maybe 3. But any village that had any sort of prominence, had any sort of ancestors that had done anything, there's a monument to them. And almost every village, at the entrance to the village, there's a monument. And what are these monuments for? Loyalty, filial piety, or womanly values, I translated it here. Faithful wives or daughters. So the women are not ignored. We very often give Confucianism a bad rap about being patriarchal and male-dominated and all of this. But one of the reasons for building a monument is for the sake of a woman who exemplifies womanly virtues. What are womanly virtues? One might be a chaste widow. If one loses one's husband, and in the Confucian hierarchy, you've moved from the wife's home into the husband's home, the wife moves into the husband's home, and helps to take care of her father-in-law, mother-in-law. Well, if the husband dies, what does the wife do? She stays there and takes care of mother-in-law and father-in-law. And if a woman exemplifies this virtue, say her husband dies really young, and she stays there and honors her father-in-law and mother-in-law, she might get a monument built to her. And if a boy does extraordinary service to his father, he might have a monument for filial piety built to him. And of course, if someone exemplifies loyalty to the state, say a hero in a war or an uprising or an insurrection and stands by the king, he might have a monument built for him. These monuments that you find on the outskirts of a village are built for one of these 3 reasons only. No other reasons. These are the only reasons you can build a monument. And you don't build a monument just because you feel like it. You have to petition the government, and the king has to authorize it. And then the monument is built. This is very top-down. Korea has a very centralized governmental structure in the Chosŏn Dynasty. So these, then, are core Confucian values that show up in monuments. And the monument, then, is a way of heralding this virtue and saying, this is what we are interested in. This is important to us. And this loyalty, filial piety, and faithful women is what we build monuments for. Another reason for getting a monument built or being a faithful woman or a filial son is if a parent is ill and dying. And to keep that parent alive, out of desperation, what do? Well, the most critical medicine that you can provide is human blood or human flesh in traditional concepts. And so if someone is dying, the fast track, we give blood transfusions. This is not, all that strange. If a son or a daughter cuts off the end of their finger so it will bleed profusely and give it to the dying parent, this blood transfusion out of desperation. Or the more common thing is to cut a piece of flesh from where you have a bit out of your buttocks or your thigh, and to cut out some flesh and feed it to this dying person. If a daughter-in-law is so concerned to save the life of this dying parent that she does that, she might get a monument erected for her. When I was reading through the annals, the royal annals one time, I found a report to the king about Madam Hyun. And it said, Madam Hyun, a young woman, a young wife, was walking across the fields with her father-in-law. And suddenly a fierce tiger appeared. And there were tigers in the old days in Korea. Tiger skins were one of the tribute trade that Koreans would trade off to China. A fierce tiger appeared and grabbed the father-in-law and had him by the neck. Madam Hyun grabbed the hide of the tiger and beat on the tiger and said, "Take me, not him, take me, not him." And the tiger released the father-in-law and ran off. The father-in-law was so impressed at the valor of this daughter-in-law that he reported it to the magistrate, who reported it upstream to the Ministry of Rights, who reported it to the king, and there was a monument erected for Madam Hyun. So these are the kinds of things that you can get monuments erected for. They're core Confucian values. There's an illustrated book of virtue that has, I meant to get a couple of pages, a copy for you. I didn't download it, but it's easy to find. These were illustrated texts that would show various ways in which you can show filial piety to your parents, or show loyalty to the state, or show womanly loyalty to one's father-in-law, whatnot. And these illustrated texts were designed to teach the non-literate. Not everybody could read back in the old days, but if you had an illustrated text, you can point out, this is what filial piety is. This is what loyalty is. And through illustrations, even though you don't have literate people, they can see the illustration and they can discuss it and they can learn from seeing these illustrated texts. So the point is that if you can read the Hyogyang or the Xiaojing, this text that I mentioned, the first text you read when you start to become a young scholar, the first text you read is the Hyogyang. But if you can't read, you've got the illustrated text, and you can see illustrations of how you should behave in a filial proper way. Okay, and if you can read, the first thing you study is the Hyogyang, and that's the first of the 7 classics that you read. Actually, the Hyogyang was originally embedded in another classic, and they pulled it out and made it a standalone because it was so core and so basic. And so you start with the Hyogyang, and then you go on through the rest of the classics. Now, why are the classics important? Well, you study the classics for the exam. And you study the exam so you can get a government position. And a government position was everything. I'm not exaggerating. It was the sole source of power, prestige, and wealth. Not being a businessman, not being a lawyer. They had lawyers who were considered subservient to the scholar official. They had accountants. There was an exam for accountants, lawyers, and doctors. These were all considered secondary to the exam for the high government official. So the high government official becomes a high government official by learning the 7 classics. The first of the 7 classics is the Hyogyang, the classic of Hyo, of filial piety. So it's core, you see. That's where we begin. That's the essential beginning of the concept. If you're going to talk about Confucianism, you're going to talk about relationships. And in Confucianism, there are the 3 bonds and the 5 relationships. This is Confucianism 101. You've run into this before. And the 3 bonds are 3 relationships that cannot be changed. That's sovereign to subject, parent to child, and husband to wife. Now, notice I've neutered the parent to child one. Sometimes it says father to son, but I've neutered it so it can be son or daughter to parent. And I think this is probably more accurate because daughters were supposed to be filial as well as womanly. And these first 3 are the 3 bonds that cannot be changed. Husband to wife, there's no such thing as divorce. You don't do that, you see. It's a bond. It's tied together forever, as with parent to child. You can't divorce your parents, although people do it today. People get mad and don't go off and see their parents. And sovereign to subject, you're loyal. You're loyal to the sovereign. You don't change your king. There's a famous case at the end of the Goryeo Dynasty in Korea where they're going to set up the Chosŏn Dynasty. And they asked one scholar official to join with them in helping to set up the new dynasty. And he said, no, I have to be loyal to my king. There are not 2 sons in the heaven. There cannot be 2 kings on the throne. That's a very Confucian way of looking at things. And so the sovereign to subject cannot change. Parent to child relationship cannot change. And husband-wife relationship cannot change. These are bonds. They're bound together. They're tied together. You cannot break this bond, you see. And then you have the 5 relationships, which are the first 3 again, adding the junior to the senior and friend to friend. And we often say that these first 4 are vertical relationships, and the last one is finally a horizontal relationship. Jushi, do you know Jushi? Jushi is the father of Neo-Confucianism, Sung Dynasty, 12th century figure who revived Confucianism and created what we often call Neo-Confucianism. Koreans and Chinese don't call it Neo-Confucianism. They call it the study of character, Sungnihak. It's character. It's character. Jushi made some qualitative judgments about these relationships. And you would think that between subject and sovereign, there should be loyalty. That makes sense. Between parent and child, there should be hyo. And now you know what hyo is. And between husband and wife, there should be roles. Each has their own role to perform. Between junior and senior, there's seniority. And between friend and friend, there should be egalitarianism or equality. And this qualitatively is what these relationships are. But this is not what Jushi said. Jushi said, between sovereign and subject, there should be righteousness or rightness. One should behave properly. And these relationships are mutual. This is not a one-way street. It's not that the subject should be righteous to the king, but the king should also be righteous to the subject. These are reciprocal. In the same way, the parent-child relationship, according to Jushi, he didn't say hyo, he said intimacy. The parent-child relationship should be intimate. And when you look at Korean families, and you look at American families, you know, I'm really impressed with Korean families that this sense of intimacy of real closeness between parent and child is really strong. It's really there, just the way Jushi said it should be. Between husband and wife, there should be separation. What does that mean? In the earlier screen, I said roles. Separation means separation of duties. And in Confucianism, the wife has wifely duties and the husband has husbandly duties. And you shouldn't mix the two. Now, this sort of flies in the face of modern feminist theory and equality between the sexes in our society and all of that. But we're not talking our society, okay? We're talking Confucian society in the old days, and there should be this distinction of roles. In fact, the husband was sometimes called the Pakkan Yangban, the outside man, the man who went outside to do his duties, and the woman was the inside person who would take care of the domestic sphere. And so this separation of roles is what Jushi said should be operating here. And between junior and senior, there should be order. Oh my goodness. Koreans are so stuck on this. If you're in the business world in Korea, this drives you nuts because seniority is everything. Who was here last night and heard Sun Jun, our monk, speak? She talked about how were the monks organized in the seating order for meals and for study? By birth date, by seniority, around the hall in the Buddhist temple. People in business in Korea say they want to promote this bright young guy who's just really with it. This guy's a mover and a shaker, and he's got his act together, and he can help the business go. But you promote him in front of the guy that's 5 years older than he, and oh, you've got hell to pay. You know, this ain't going to work, boys and girls, you see. So Korean business people have recognized this, and they've tried to deconstruct this seniority thing by getting rid of some of the old terminology for the different organizations, the section, the subsection, the division, and all this. And they just call them all teams. And the head of the team is the teamjang, the team leader. And they're trying to do this so they can shake things up so that the younger guy who's really with it can be made a section head. But they're fighting a great inertia on this thing because in most contexts, it's the hierarchy by age that makes all the difference. And you see it all over in Korean society, that junior and senior, if you went to the same school as someone else, you're a classmate of this person, right? In Korea, you're not a classmate. Well, I guess you can be. But generally, you're either a senior classmate or a junior classmate. It's qualified. You know, you're either ahead of me or you're behind me, and don't get it mixed up. Okay? So this is an important concept here of the junior and senior is in order. And between friend to friend, there should be trust. And this makes sense. In military context, you know, for example, you've got to trust your cohort. Okay, so here are the 3 bonds and the 5 relationships with a qualitative assessment of what they are. What I'm trying to do is I just don't want to jump into literature. I mean, the assigned topic is filial piety and literature, and I don't want to get into literature and say, here's filial piety, if you don't know what filial piety is. So we've got to take some time here and define what filial piety is along the way, okay? And it's core to Confucianism, so this is Confucianism along the way, okay? That's where we're going. You with me? Everybody there? Okay. So at what age does one begin to show Hyo? And at what age are you through with Hyo? What do you think? Is Hyo a thing for children? Yes, it's a thing for children. Is it a thing for adults? Absolutely. It doesn't quit. It doesn't quit. You learn Hyo as a child, and you practice Hyo as an adult, and you practice Hyo as an old person, because you still practice Hyo for your ancestors after they've died. The core ceremony in Confucianism is the ancestor ceremony. The core reason for doing the ancestor ceremony is Hyo. So the idea is that this is not just something you teach children. Now, many people would think so. And often when you go to a school, they'll have posted up on above the roof line, they'll have Chung and Hyo, loyalty and filial piety, for teaching the children. And so, you know, when you honor your father and mother, you tend to think of teaching children. And you do. And that's correct. But it doesn't stop there. It goes on throughout life. And people your age, people my age, still have to practice Hyo. And the way it's manifest often is in the ceremonies after the ancestors have died. So there it is. The heart of the ancestor ceremonies. Now, I put ceremonies in quotation marks because some texts will say ancestor worship. I think to call it worship is problematic because the idea is not so much to worship the ancestors. Worship implies a god, maybe, and you're not talking about your ancestors becoming gods, but you are performing these ceremonies of respect. If you go to Korea with a Christian or a Judeo-Christian background, you have the Old Testament concept of not bowing down before graven images, and maybe not bowing down to ancestors. But in Korean society, you show respect to your ancestors by bowing before them. You bow to seniors. You bow a lot. If you're not going to bow, get out of town. You don't belong here. And what happens is one day, Grandpa and Grandma celebrating their 70th or 80th birthday, and they sit up at the head of the room behind a table that's laden with cakes and goodies, and everybody bows to them. The next day they die, and you set out the table at the funeral and you bow to their spirit. And the funeral lasts for 3 years. The first anniversary, the second anniversary, and the third anniversary. And you come and you bow to them where they were just sitting there just a while ago. And so you bow to their spirit even though they're physically not there. And then you come back for ancestor ceremonies and you bow again. You see, so bowing is not a problematic thing at all, you see. And so it's part of the respect, and that's the core of the ancestor worship, because the person is still there in some sense. They were there a while ago, and now their spirit is there. And you have, in modern context, a photograph of them. In the old context, a wooden tablet with their name on it, and that represents them as if they were there. So that's the heart of the ancestor ceremony, you see. It's bowing to a person to show respect to that person as if they were there, you see. And so that's, so ancestor worship, you know, you weren't worshiping them when they were 70 years old or 80 years old. And you're not worshiping them now that they're 90 and 110 and gone, you see. Okay. Well, I just said it again. Yeah, it's the heart of Confucianism. The ceremonies, it's really interesting that Confucius said, don't ask about spirits. And yet the core ceremony is to these spirits that have gone on. What is Hyo in today's world? I had a lot of fun doing this. I thought I'd just go through Google Images. You know, so far this has been very plain, hasn't it? Some of you teachers are much better at PowerPoint. You have all these I can't do all this. I'm very plain. But I wanted to get a few illustrations. So I looked up a few illustrations, and I found a bunch of really interesting things. And it opened my eyes as to what hyo is today. I found this. This is a hyo concert. A hyo concert. I thought, what the heck is that? And as I go through Google Images, it says an outdoor stage performance. And here we got these singers and such that are going to come sing at this hyo concert. What in the world is a hyo concert? Here's another one. Kim Jong-im. Do you know who that is? Is she a famous singer? I don't know. Kim Hyo-im. And look, right in the middle of the carnation, it says hyo. There's the Chinese character for hyo right there. And it says, Mother, we thank you. Father, double. And it says, special concert and dinner dance at a high-class hotel for Parents' Day. In Korea, you don't have Mother's Day and Father's Day. It's Parents' Day together. And here, it's $200 for the $220 for the VIP and $200 for the reserved seats. So, you know, if you're going to show respect to mom and dad, they're getting a little older, spend $200. Well, what's wrong with you, cheapskate? Come on. Send them out to the show and see Kim Jong-un. She's a beautiful lady. I'm sure she sings well. And go to this high-class hotel and have a dinner show. And it's hyo. It's hyo. Here it says 3 persons, 3 different styles of dinner concert for hyo. There's hyo, the Chinese character for hyo. And we've got a maybe opera singer, a traditional singer, and a pop singer. 3 different stages, 3 different kinds of singers. Oh Jung-hae here, by the way, is one of my favorite people in the whole world. I met her once. She's the performer in Sopyeonje. If you know Sopyeonje, the story of the Western or the Korean opera. She was a teenager at that point. I really enjoy her. Anyway, this was just this last May. This was just recently. And so what is hyo? Part of it is spending some money to take mom and dad out, who were grandpa and grandma, probably, and see the show. Here's in Daejeon, a family culture and root festival. And here's hyo. Oh, there you've got the English. There's hyo, the Chinese character. Hyo culture and root festival in Daejeon. This was last year. So you see what's happening? You see how hyo is manifest today? Here's a nationwide hyo thing. Some of these others have been regional. The one before was sponsored in Daejeon. Daejeon's a big city just south of Seoul a ways. And now here's a nationwide festival on hyo behavior, hyohang. And so this lionizing of hyo, putting hyo out there as a positive virtue. Well, here's a stage. These are just images I pulled off the net. And here's a stage, and here's the banner. You can't have a thing. You can't have any kind of thing, any kind of activity without a banner. When Mrs. Chen and I go to Korea with our textbook group or our teachers group, our host institution, the Academy of Korean Studies, the Korea Foundation, put up a banner. You got to have a banner on the street at the head of the stage. If you don't have a banner, you don't have anything. Okay? And here's the banner, and it's a hyo concert. And here is love and hyo. We'll see love and hyo together here a bit. And who attends these things? Old geezers. Here are the people going to the hyo thing. Don't be offended if I call them geezers. I'm an old geezer. I'm a member of the club now. So geezers. This is a geezer concert. David Letterman was talking about a couple of old hockey players that were trying to revive their careers. And he said, what is this, geezers on ice? So here's a bunch of the old folks, senior citizens. Let's be kind. Senior citizens. This is who attends the Hyo concert. You see? And they dress up, the nice hanbok, and the Korean dress here, and they go see the Hyo concert. And it might be out of doors. Here's the character Hyo again. Are you starting to recognize the character Hyo? The bottom part here is son, and the top part I think has to do with elderly, the son and the elderly together. And that's an outdoor event. And you got some people up there singing away. Here's a Hyo concert. There's Hyo in Korean, not Chinese, but Hyo. And here's a Hyo sarang. They're doing this Hyo and love together. Love and Hyo are being conflated here. And this is a percussion group. You see the drums back here? And they're taking their bows after they've performed. And it says Kwanak, which is the southern section, one of the southern sections of Seoul, with the Hyo sarang big festival for Hyo and love. Here is a thing for the center of Seoul for public officials who are being trained in culture and applied education and Hyo. So here we're training government officials on how they should behave, and training session for government officials, and Hyo is part of it, which for a government official would be respectful to the old folks in your neighborhood, in your work. You see, so Hyo is not just for kids, teaching kids to be respectful of their parents. It's for government officials to be respectful of the old folks in the neighborhood. Here is a Chinese-Korean conference. It says between China and Korea, the two countries, philosophy and religion conference, and then here it says Hyo sarang and religion. So it's there's Hyo philosophy, the philosophy of Hyo and religion, comparative conference between China and Korea. And here's some group of sponsors of this thing where Chinese and Koreans are going to sit down together and talk about Hyo and love and religion and philosophy and make some sense of it. Interesting, huh? So this is applied Hyo. Filial piety. Come on, there we go. This one kills me. This just kills me. There's the English. The 12th Hwasong. Hwasong is another name for Suwon, a city just south of Seoul. Filial piety marathon. We're going to have a marathon, and we're going to name it in filial piety to give us a good reason for doing it. Isn't that something? You see how Hyo is becoming the motivational or justifiable reason for some social programs. Okay, look at this one. The Scent of the Millennium, the huge festival for Hyo and sarang. Here we got these conflations of the sarang, which I think is a Christian creeping in. And where is it? Amundsen High School in Chicago. So this is across the waters. And here's the next one. I got two of these. Where's this? Amundsen High School again. The 12th annual and the other image. See, these are just random images. The 10th annual festival. This was 2008, and this was 2010. Amundsen High School, 12th annual, 10th annual Hyo concert. So here we've got Korean Americans trying to inculcate proper Korean virtues into the next generation here in the States. And how do we do it? We have a Hyo concert. And we celebrate Hyo in this dinner show. Feast. Oh, look. Senior Citizens Day celebration is what they're calling it. Okay? Interesting, huh? So we think of Hyo for children. Here's an image that I picked up in Daegu of the children with their parents going out on a Hyo outing, a picnic. And they call it Hyo. And here's a banner that a child, these next three are banners that children have done. that says, through enacting Hyo, flowers bloom and we have a happy house. And here, through applying Hyo and love, the whole family will be happy. Okay? And here is, like grandmother's heart, the warm path of Hyo we should apply. We should practice Hyo to be as warm and as good as grandmother's heart. There's nothing warmer or better than grandmother's heart. And what is grandmother's heart? It's Hyo, you see. And we should show Hyo to grandmother and apply Hyo to have a happy family. You see how it works? This is a Hyo camp, I found. And what's a Hyo camp? It's training the children to apply Hyo and to learn how to bow respectfully, and they wear their old costumes. And here's a Hyo lecture at the Hyo Academy at a camp, at a school vacation camp. And here's the guy dressed up, these two guys dressed up in the old costume, teaching the children how to be Hyo, okay, as part of a revival of Korean culture, that have this camp, because maybe the schools aren't doing it adequately. We have to have a camp to practice our culture. Here is the Hyo Old Age Folks, Elderly, Senior Citizens Welfare Center. Now, we're screwed up in America. We don't know what welfare means. We talk about welfare, what do we call it? Welfare cheats, welfare. Welfare has a kind of negative connotation in English, doesn't it? He's on welfare. She's collecting welfare. That's bad stuff. In Korea, welfare is a positive term. It's a good thing. It's to fare well, to do well. Now, if you've got old folks here that need a place to stay, here's a senior citizen center where they can fare well. So it's the welfare center. It doesn't mean a handout and these negative concepts we have for welfare. It's for the senior citizens to fare well in a senior citizen center. And it was called a Hyo, Hyo Senior Citizen Center. There's the phone number, and come on by. Well, as I said a few moments ago, Hyo is the center of the ancestor ceremonies. And here we have not just an ancestor ceremony, but a display of ancestor ceremony for other people to learn how it's done. Because there are some sectors of Korean society. Korean society was very highly stratified in the old days, and only the upper class would do the ceremonies. And so here they're showing all classes how the ceremonies are done. This is an instructive process here. And here's a book on Hyo. There's Hyo. You recognize that character now? And it says the Korean people's ancestor worship or ancestor ceremonies and Hyo. So here's a book that explicitly ties these two together, how Hyo is the core of ancestor ceremonies. This is Chinese, but I put it in here because I couldn't find a Korean one. But Hyo is not alien to Buddhism. It's a core Confucian concept, but Buddhists also believe in Hyo. And Buddhists will talk about Hyo. And here's a Dharma assembly in China that's based on filial piety. And you could just as well find this thing in Korea. I didn't. I found this Chinese one, but I threw it in because it applies in Korea as well, where the Buddhists will also talk about Hyo. Now, this was on a set of pages that were on a church website. And the church website is saying Hyo and love are overlapping. Christian love and Confucian Hyo are okay. There's no contradiction. We can go for this. This is a good thing. And let's see, what have I done? Oh, we'll come back to this Christian thing in just a minute. Yeah, Hyo wrinkle cream. Yeah, here's Hyo right there. See Hyo? There's Hyo. And this is makeup to smooth out the wrinkles. Why? If you're a Hyo daughter, you should be young and vibrant in front of grandma, in front of mother-in-law, and you shouldn't be looking as old as she does. You've got a duty to preserve yourself and be pretty and have nice skin. In the same way, the extreme of this is if you die before your parents, that's an extremely sinful thing to do because you're not being Hyo. You're not being Hyo to stick around and take care of grandma and grandpa when they're old, mother and dad when they're old, if you go and die young. So it's a terrible thing to die young, not just in and of itself. I mean, that's terrible enough as it is. But if you die young, you can't carry out the ceremonies and take care of grandma and grandpa when they're older. And on the same token then, if you have a wrinkly old prune face before your time, that's not good. So you got to get some wrinkle cream here for Hyo. Hyo wrinkle cream. Isn't that great? This says Hyo is the economic power of Korea. So now we're taking Hyo to one more layer. You see what I mean? I found a lot of things about Hyo I hadn't realized. This is really interesting to say Hyo has an economic dimension as well. Now, I'm not going to have time to do these, but you can all get a copy of this. These are all different pages of, here's one that's dedicated to Hyo culture, where you can go to these pages and you can see page after page of these celebrations, these feasts and festivals of pictures of people going to these Hyo concerts and these sorts of things. So that's what those websites are about. And you see things like this. Remember I mentioned you've got the senior citizens up there at the table and you set out the cakes in front of them. There they are alive. And when they die, you do the same thing again to their memory, you see. And that's the essence of Hyo, which is also the essence of ancestor ceremonies. Here is a festival for Hyo, and they're doing the farmers band, and everybody's out dancing. So these Hyo festivals take all sorts of different shape. And I think this is the last of these slides. This is the story of Shimchung. Shimchung was the faithful daughter. And I'm going to talk about this as a literary example. But here is a performance of this. And this is for it cropped up under Hyo when I put in Hyo under Google Images. And I thought I saw Hyo somewhere on the sign. I don't see it right now. Anyway, Shimchung is the example of filial piety. Okay, now let's do literature. Okay, and what I'm going to cover here is poetry, both in Chinese and in Shizhou. We're going to look at Shizhou poetry, and then we're going to look at pre-modern literature and then modern literature, and look at several examples of filial piety that show up in these literary works that hopefully you can use in your class, that you'll like to use, I hope. Okay, the first example of poetry is this woman here, whose name is Shin Saimdang, and she is honored by, just as of 2 years ago, being put on the new issue of the 50,001 note. Before this time, Korea had 5,001 notes and 10,001 notes. They finally issued a 50,001 note. This is about $50. And before, the biggest bill you could get was a $10 bill, the 10,001. And who did they put on the bill? Shin Saimdang, this famous woman artist. She painted this painting here, and she painted this painting here. She was famous for painting plants and insects. And here's the butterfly, and here's some bugs, and here's some plants. And she had a whole series of these that she did. And she wrote this poem, and it's just loaded with filial piety, Hyo consciousness. She said, I leave my old mother in my hometown. As I travel the lonely road to Seoul, this heart, I look back, hoping for one last glimpse of North Village, but alas, it's shrouded in fogs and clouds. She lived on the East Coast, and to leave her home, you cross the famous Taegwalyang Pass. The East Coast is a fairly narrow strip of land bordered by the mountains that take you back to Seoul. Korea is a tilted table if you look at it from east to west. The plains are on the west, and as you go to the east, it gets higher and higher. Then it drops down into the sea, and Gangneung is there, and that's where she was from. And she talks about crossing the Taegwalyang Pass, going over this pass, and as she hikes up the pass, these days you drive it in your car. They talk about the 99 turns of the Taegwalyang. You go back and forth, and you go over the other side, then wind your way all the way back into Seoul. But here she is, as she leaving home, she looks and sees her old mother. Oh, this heart of mine is about to break as I look back and see, can I get one last glimpse as I look over my shoulder? But no, it's shrouded in fog, so she doesn't even get the satisfaction of seeing her remote village from up on the mountain. That was one Chinese poem. There are lots more, but I didn't want to give too much. But this is one of the nice poems in Chinese that radiates filial piety. The next thing I want to look at is Shizhou. I want you to know about Shizhou. And Shizhou is the answer. What's the question? What I'm getting at here, if Shizhou is the answer, okay? But what's the question? The question is, what form of literature from Korea is best to adopt in Korean literature? That's the question. And the answer is Shizhou. And the question is, what style of Korean poetry is best suited to teach in American schools? The answer is Shizhou. Shizhou is the answer. That's the question. Or, what part of Korean culture is most likely to be accommodated into American culture? The answer is Shizhou. Shizhou is a very translatable, transcultural poem, poetic form. And I hope all of you, through this next segment that I look at, can be inspired to look at Shizhou as a vehicle for teaching about Korean culture, and also to accommodate Korean culture into your classrooms and into your curriculum. And why do I say this? Because haiku has already done it. Haiku is a core Japanese concept, is it not? It's Japanese culture in a short verse, and yet it's become part of American culture, has it not? There was a time when I would ask students if they'd studied haiku, and several years ago they would say, yeah, we had that in high school. More recently I say, have you studied haiku in school? And they say, yeah, we had that in junior high. Now they're getting haiku in the 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade. They're doing haiku. And we Koreanists are jealous of the Japanese. The Japanese have been very successful in, and I don't know if they actually tried to promote it or if it's just a natural thing that Americans picked up on haiku. But Shizhou is the next step, the next logical step. As haiku has become part of American culture in our multicultural society, Shizhou is the next step. Shizhou is the answer. See, and the question is, where can we best implant Korean culture in the curriculum? And the answer is Shizhou. And it worked for haiku. Why won't it work for Shizhou? Okay? And so haiku has been accommodated into American culture. So too Shizhou can become a part of American culture. It's the next logical step. Because what is Shizhou? It's a 3-line poem, just like haiku, but a little more complicated, with a measured meter, just like haiku, with longer lines and more content. So it's the next logical step. And if you teach haiku, you should next be teaching shijo. Okay? Like haiku, it's 3 lines. The first line introduces a topic. The second line develops the topic in a certain direction. And the third line offers a twist or a resolution of that topic, just like haiku. But the meter is a little more complicated. It's a little bit longer meter. Haiku is 5/7/5, right? Shijo is 3s and 4s in this first line. Now, there's sometimes a break. I put this semicolon in parentheses. Each line might have a break in the middle. A caesura is what the literary people call it, kind of a pause. And it's all 3s and 4s. Now you might say, well, which is it? Is it 3 beats or is it 4 beats? And I didn't put this slide in, but I've got another slide. What's the meter of this poem? Tell me the meter. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, which was the 17th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. Now that's a very measured meter, is it not? Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Now that sounds very uniform, does it not? 'Twas the 19th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. That sounds very uniform, does it not? It's not. It's 9s and 12s, 9s and 10s and 12s. You see? So the meter does not have to be exact to sound exact in our ear. Count it out. Listen, my children, and you shall hear. 9. Of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. That's 9. 'Twas the 19th of April in 75. That's 11. Hardly a man is now alive. That's only 8. Who remembers that famous day and year. Is 10. You see, but to our ear it all sounds the same. But it's 9s and 10s and 11s. You see? So don't get hung up on whether it's 3 or 4. You've got some flex in the poem as you go. Okay? The punchline comes here. In the second line, in the second segment, you go a little bit longer, and that's where the punchline comes. Now, in English, we like our punchline at the end. You can do that. You can do that in a shijo, in an English version. I didn't put this in, maybe I should have, but I was recently a judge of an American school children's shijo contest. It was sponsored by the Chosǒn Cultural Society in Chicago, and they had kids from all over the country, Korean American kids and American American kids, sending in these shijo. And there were 3 of us who on the internet bounced them back and forth. I like this one, this one, this one, and I like this one, and we had to negotiate, and we just announced our winners. And these were shijo written by American kids in American culture. So it works. And in fact, strangely, shijo has a better chance of working in America than it does in Korea in some ways. What am I talking about? What's that? Yeah. In Korea, they tend to just study the masters and don't make their own. In English, in America, we write our own haiku. We study basho, and we learn about a quiet pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of the splash. We can do that, and we study basho, but then we write our own in haiku. Well, you can write your own shijo, and they're fun to write. Let's look at shijo. We're talking about filial piety, so I picked a couple that can apply to filial piety. Here's an example. Though I die and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul is reincarnated or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. I mentioned early on that in Confucianism, you cannot have 2 sons in the heaven, you cannot have 2 kings on the throne. That's this guy. And he said, no, I will not support your new dynasty. No, I cannot be disloyal to the old dynasty. No, I will not be part of this insurrection. If you're invited to become part of an insurrection and you say no, what's going to happen to you? You're a dead man. And he knew it. He knew he was signing his death warrant by refusing to join the new coup. And he expressed it in a poem, "Though I die, and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul exists or not, whether I'm reincarnated or not, who knows? That's up for debate. You don't know about reincarnation. You don't know if you're going to live again. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I don't know. But whether that happens or not, my heart, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away." And they killed him. But he lives. He lives in this poem, in this shijo. And he's a representative of loyalty better than anything you can imagine. He lives. And every Korean child knows this poem. 이 몸이 죽고 죽고 100번 거쳐 죽고 백골이 진토되어 녹시라도 있고 없고 님 향한 일편단심이야 가실 줄 있으랴. You see? There isn't a Korean that doesn't know that poem. I'm sorry, if you're Korean, you don't know that poem, you're not a Korean. Is that true? You memorized it. Yeah. If you don't know this poem, you got to turn in your citizen's card. Okay? You don't qualify as a citizen. But it's not only a great poem, and not only expresses this core concept of loyalty. I mean, you just hear the loyalty. It just rings in this poem. And it not only is a great example of loyalty, it's a great example of a shijo. Look at the meter. Though I die and die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul exists or not, my red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. You see it? You see it? That's the structure of it. How many lines do you see? Don't say 6, it's 3. Okay, it's a 3-line poem, but they're longish lines, so very often you have to write it as 6 lines, but it's not 6, it's 3. And you have a bit of this caesura as a break there, where you can make it into a subordinate line here if you need to by indenting. So it's a 3-line poem, like the haiku is a 3-line, but it's a little longer, a little complicated, a little more complicated, but it can convey great meaning. You know, you can add a lot of great things in this thing. Now, the haiku author will say less is more. And in a sense, haiku is really wonderful because it's so short, so pithy. It just gets right in there. But sometimes you want to say a little bit more, and the shijo accommodates this very, very nicely. Okay? So I want to make you all advocates of shijo. Okay? And here's where we start. Though I die, die again, though I die 100 deaths, after my bones have turned to dust, whether my soul exists or not, or whether my soul is reincarnated or not. I put reincarnation in here. It actually says "Nokshirado ikko opko." It's really interesting. Even my soul, whether it is or whether it isn't. And I put in I extrapolated a little bit and put reincarnation in here because that's the essence of whether your soul exists or not. My red heart. The expression in Korean is just so beautiful. Nim hyang han is toward my Lord or King. Nim hyang han ilpyan tanshimiya, this single piece of a red heart. Then there's an ya on it, an emphasis. This red heart, forever loyal to my Lord, will never fade away. Ah, that's great, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. That's the poem of loyalty. Come on. Come on, Rashid. There we go. Now we have a poem of disloyalty. You can sometimes understand an idea best by understanding the opposite of the idea. If you're loyal, you know what that means. But what does it mean to be disloyal? This woman, this Chosŏn, you know what a Chosŏn is? You know what a geisha is? You know what a geisha is, you know what a Chosōn is. Professional entertainer, a class of society where Chosōn were not prostitutes. The prostitutes claimed to be Chosōn, you see. But this Chosōn was a very, very clever gal, Huang Jini. She was very, very clever. And there was a magistrate who was assigned to town, and it was her job to entertain the magistrates. Well, the new magistrate came in, and this magistrate paid no attention to her. He was probably loyal to Mrs. Magistrate back in Seoul. You see, and they're out in Kaesong. And she says, well, you haughty fellow who ignores me, we'll see about that, you know. Don't you ignore me. And she wrote him this poem. And it turns out his pen name was Jade Green Stream. That was his pen name. Her pen name is Bright Moon. So she writes to him this poem and sends it to him. Jade green stream flowing through the green hills, don't be so proud of your easy going. Once you reach the vast sea, to return again will be most difficult. While bright moon fills the empty hills, why not rest a bit before you go on? Do you get it? Yeah. And this is just a masterpiece. I didn't put it together for you. I should have, I guess. But I've got another slide. David McCann, who teaches at Harvard, is a specialist on Shijō and Kasa, another form of poetry. He pointed out that the first half of each line is in Chinese. The second half of each line is in Korean. So it goes Chinese, Korean, Chinese, Korean, Chinese, Korean in its diction. It says, Pyeokye suya, Cheongsan ni Pyeokye suya. Those are Chinese characters. Then it says, Sui kamol charang mara, which is in pure Korean. And then it's in Chinese, Ilto chang he demyeon. Ilto chang he demyeon is in a very archaic diction, very unusual way of saying when you reach the vast sea. It said, well, to understand this, let's apply the same principle to English. There's a principle in English called diglossia, and it operates in Korean as well. What is diglossia? It turns out our English language is composed of basically two elements, Anglo-Saxon words and Greek-Latin words. And Greek-Latin tend to be more specialized words, right? They tend to be the words of the lawyer and of the doctor. You know, they have the habeas corpus. I had a lump on my back several years ago, and I went in to see the doctor, and he said, oh, let's lance that and take it out and see what it is, make sure it's not a cancer or something. And so he lanced it and had to send it off to the lab, and he called me back a couple of days later and says, it's okay, it was just some necrotic tissue. Necrotic tissue. I'm paying you $120 for a visit so you can tell me I got necrotic tissue. What's necrotic tissue? Dead cells. It was a zit. You know, if he told me it was a zit, I'd only pay him $10. He tells me it's necrotic tissue, I have to pay him $120. Am I right? That's diglossia, where we have Latin, Greek words operating in certain contexts and Anglo-Saxon words operating in another context. We shoot a deer and we eat venison. We raise pigs and we eat pork. We raise cows and we eat beef. Right? We raise poultry and we eat chicken. You know, we don't eat what we raise. You know, we have different words for it. So this is diglossia. And Koreans have this. And the first half of each of these lines is in Chinese diction. 일도 장해되면. Oh, that's very esoteric. You know, what can you do with it in English? I'd like to get a Greek or Latin word for this. To arrive at the sea. How would you say that in Latin? How would you say that in Greek? You know, that's what she's doing. And what she's doing is she's saying, look, hotshot, you think you're something special. You think you're well educated, but you got nothing on me, fella. I can write in these terms, and I can also write in soft Korean terms. To return again will be most difficult. Once you reach the sea, sugar, it's all over for you. Water doesn't roll uphill. You know, this is your chance. This is your chance, you know. And if you want to sit down and have some good entertainment and some good food, you know, come on to my house. And so that's what she's saying. So this is the song of the temptress. While bright moon, what's her pen name? Fills the empty hills. This was done in a very interesting Chinese character. The character there is usually used to mean to satisfy. But here she's talking about while the bright moon satisfies the empty hills, while the bright moon saturates the empty hills, while the bright moon fills the empty hills. She's using a very elegant diction here, this, you know, Latin, in effect, Chinese, you know. And she says, Myungwori man gong san hani, while the bright moon fills the empty hills. Then she softens it again to go to the pure Korean. Why not rest a bit before you go on? This is so tempting. She's speaking masculinely, then femininely. She's speaking in official diction, and then in unofficial diction. She's speaking in Chinese, and then in pure Korean, you see. And this interplay that goes back and forth is part of the seduction of this poem. You like that? You better like that. Okay. Well, here's the theme song today is Filial Piety, and loyalty that we looked at is part and parcel of filial piety, right? And here's one that is right at the heart of filial piety. Father, mother, my deceased parents, for you I have mourned 3 years, as prescribed by the sages in the classics, in the classic texts of Confucianism. You tended my tender little spirit for more than 3 years when I was born. You mourned for 3 years because your parents took care of you for 3 years when you could not take care of yourself. And if your parents did not take good care of you during those first tender 3 years, you wouldn't be here. And there are a lot of babies that don't make it through the 3 years, right? The Koreans celebrate the first 100 days. If a baby makes 100 days, that's a big deal. Koreans celebrate the first year. If you make the first year, you might just make it. But when you talk about infant mortality being maybe 50%, a lot of babies don't make it. So, in the same way that you tended my tender spirit for more than 3 years when I was born, I have mourned for you for 3 years. I've taken care of your spirit for 3 years after you've died. So that's the Confucian concept, okay? Now, this poem, I've played a trick on you. I was looking for a good shijo that would really speak to filial piety like this one. And I couldn't find it, so I wrote it. This is not 1220, it's 2012. It's not 10, I put it here, I'm playing a joke on you. And Peterson, this fellow, that's my Chinese name. Peterson, Peterson. So, you thought it was good, huh? Yeah, well, I did that. And I played a trick on you. I couldn't find the exact shijo that I wanted, so I wrote one for you, okay? Okay. Forgive me for tricking you. Very nice. let's take a break for a minute and then look at these next few segments, and then go on. Let's take a 5-minute break. Is that okay? In the earlier slide, I said we've got. We're going to look at literature. We're going to look at poetry. We did the Chinese and the Shizhou. Then we want to look a little bit at pre-modern tales and then some modern literature. Okay, so let's go ahead to this. The one story I want to talk about most is The Blind Man's Daughter, the story of Shimchang. And this story is one of 3 pansori. Pansori is Korean opera, but it's not sung with great staging the way American Western opera is. There's one singer and a drummer, and that's the whole opera. And she sings the story. And there are 3 great stories, and all of them are as Confucian as Confucian can be. The first one that I want to talk about is Shimchang, the blind man's daughter. The blind man and his daughter. That's this filial piety thing, you see, of what are the relationships? King and subject, parent to child, husband and wife. There's that parent to child relationship. The other 2 stories are Chunhyang, the story of the loyal wife. And this story is easily captured in the movie Chunhyang. If you want to show a good piece of Korean culture, you've got to censor it just a little bit. The love scene's a little bit too much a little too explicit. But it's a great story, and they have the pansori singer flashing back in the story. So the film is really done nicely because it captures the actual pansori, the singer, and then it goes to enactment, the real movie. In the old days, it's really nicely done. So, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about filial piety. The third story, the third of the 3 great stories, is Hungbu, the good-hearted brother. And this is an avarice brother and a good-hearted brother, and that story is a lot of fun as well. So I point you to these if you want to look at these stories. They're really good. But the main story we want to look at today is The Blind Man's Daughter. And we're going to look just briefly at the Hongil-dong story. So these 3, the pansori, they were originally sung, but then there's a written version. So you can read it as a written version or as a libretto for the opera. And then we'll talk a little bit about Hongil-dong. The story of the story of Shimchang has been translated and written by Marshall Peale. Marshall Peale was at Harvard for a long time, finished his career out at Hawaii. He died a premature death, but he wrote a great book on pansori. About half the book, it's actually the Korean Singer of Tales. There it is. I put the cover in it of the book. This is actually a new edition. The cover of the book I've got looks a little bit different, but here's the singer and here's the drummer. And the Korean Singer of Tales is the way he looks at it. Half the book is about pansori itself, what pansori is, and half the book is a translation of the Shimchang story. So this is available to you. There's the Google or the Amazon image. I cut and pasted this off of Amazon. You can get this by Marshall Peale. He used to joke about his name. His name is Danish, and it's P-I-H-L. And it turns out there's an obscure name in Korea, obscure surname in Korea, Pil. And so he would adopt the Korean surname Pil because it works for Marshall Peale. And he would joke about his own name. He said, "What's that guy Phil? Who's that guy Phil?" It's not Phil. But people would misread his name somewhere and say Marshall Philip. No, his name was Pil. So you can look this up. You can have a copy of this PowerPoint. It'll be here. You're more than welcome to it to use and adapt and change however you want to. So anyway, there's the text for this one if you want to follow up and learn about this. The story can be found either as the song or the legend, the written version, the narrative text, or the libretto, as I just said. The libretto has two parts to it. There's aniri, which is narration, and there's chang, which is the singing. And in Marshall Peel's version, he uses the pansori version, so he has some of the songs are written in there with narrative text to piece the songs together. So this originally was a story that was sung. And there's a marvelous professor at Ohio State by the name of Pak Chan-ung, who will travel around a bit and do pansori performances and explanations. And she's just wonderful because she'll lapse into singing. She'll sing, and then she'll just stop in the middle and explain it, then go back into the singing. And that's really what the pansori singer is like. She can do the pansori. It's a very hard style of singing to do. I can't imitate it. It's throat singing. It's a really difficult kind of singing style. So originally it was a song, and it had these two different styles, the narrative part and then the singing part. And that's the version that Marshall Peel translated. But you can find it just as a straight narrative text without the versification of the singing part. The story. Shimchung was a young woman who lived with her widowed blind father. She heard that a Buddhist temple was looking for a sacrifice to the dragon god that lives in the sea. And she offered herself as a sacrifice and got 50 bags of rice or something. And she could, with that payment, she could buy some exotic medicine to help get her father's sight back. She was sure that if she could get the right medicine, that her father would regain his sight. And the dragon god, then after she gets the payment, she's taken out by the Buddhist temple on a boat and dumped into the sea as this sacrifice to the dragon god. And the dragon god is so impressed with her hyo that he saves her life and restores her to the terrestrial world and tells the king about her. And the king, of course, took her to be his wife. I mean, that's what you do. And then they summon the father, who of course has regained his sight and is overwhelmed with joy at the reunion of seeing his daughter, who's alive after her ordeal. So that's the storyline. So it's a very simple plot, but this faithful hyo woman who sacrifices herself so that her father can regain his sight. So that's one story that you can use, and you've got Marshall Peel's book to refer to if you'd like. The next story I'd like to tell you about is Honggil-dong, and there's an element of hyo here. The story is a kind of a Robin Hood story, and it begins with a boy born to a nobleman, a high state minister, but not by the wife, by the slave concubine. And the way it works is this: the high minister, the story opens with the high minister, and he had a dream. He took a nap in the middle of the day and had a dream, and in the dream he saw a dragon. That's a good thing. See a dragon. Have a dragon dream is a very good thing. It's a very good thing. And so he goes to the missus and says, I had a dragon dream. I had a dragon dream. And she said, oh, you silly boy, in the middle of the afternoon. You know, you're a high state minister. You know, don't be so horny in the middle of the day. You know, hold on to your dignity. And so he retires to his room. My wife doesn't understand me. And in comes Spring Caterpillar, the servant girl. And she's offering him afternoon tea. And as she offers the tea, he grabs her by her jade-like wrist. Beautiful women have jade-like wrists, jade-like hands, jade-like face. he takes her by her jade-like wrist and presses his affection upon her. Da, 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 da. And that's how Hongil-dong was born. So a noble man and an ignoble woman, a slave girl, and so Hongil-dong did not have the brakes going for him, you see. And he wanted to be Hyo, you see. He wanted to be Hyo, he wanted to show filial piety to his father, but as an illegitimate son, the word for it is soja in Korean, the word illegitimate son is not a good translation, because in English, if you have an illegitimate son, it's someone who is not recognized by the father, right? He denies parentage. But here, the father recognizes his parentage. James Pillay, who was a great historian up at the University of Washington, passed away a few years ago. He found this old, speaking of Latin, this Latin word, nothoi. Nothoi is this. Nothoi is not an illegitimate son, but a son recognized by the father, but there's of another mother, of a mistress or concubine or secondary wife. Oh, and Spring Caterpillar, once he took her by her jade-like wrist, she never gave herself to another man, but was loyal as concubine, as secondary wife to the state minister, you see. So there's great virtue in all of this. But poor Hongil-dong is left in the middle. Is he an aristocrat like his father, or is he slave-like like his mother? And one day he's studying, and he realizes he'll never be allowed to take the civil service exam. But he's been studying like his brother, and he pushes his desk away. I love the imagery, because in English we push ourselves away from the desk. But in Korea you have these little, you sit on the floor and you have these little tables. He pushed the table away and went out in the courtyard and started practicing martial arts, swordmanship. And he says, if I cannot become a high state minister like my father, if I'm not allowed to take the civil service exam, I'll be a great general. And he vows that he will subjugate the East and conquer the West and become a great general. But he can't do that because he's not a legitimate heir to the household. So he becomes a renegade and goes to a cave and works with the Save the Poor band. In other words, a Robin Hood figure. And the gendarmes try to catch him, but because he's so clever, he either avoids them by his wit or by his swordsmanship and his skills, or by magic. And he acquires magic, and he can leap 20 li in one bound. One of my favorite episodes is the gendarme hear about him. Oh, and they used to say he would appear like lightning in the east and lightning in the west. When I go to Korea sometimes and I run into an old friend, they say, oh, you're back to Korea again. One day you're in America, one day you're in Korea. Soya-bonjok, toya-bonjok. You're lightning in the east, you're lightning in the west. I'm like Hongil-dong. You appear here and there. Well, Hongil-dong at one time, the lightning was in the east. They went out and they tracked him down and they cornered him. The gendarme cornered him in a box canyon, and there was no way out. And they move in, and as they're coming in, he looks, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And he sees the rice stalks. It's fall, and the rice stalks are bundled up. They're standing here. And he quickly gathers 10 of these bundles of rice stalk together, and he breathes on each of them, and they all turn it into a replica of him. So now there's not one Hongil-dong to fight, but there are 11. And they all have swords, and here come the gendarme, and there's a great sword fight. And the gendarme, as soon as they slash one of the false Hongil-dong in two, he falls to the ground as the sack of straw. And they slash the next one, and it falls to the ground, and the next one, and it falls to the ground. The gendarme are going through, and they finally slash the 10th one, and it falls to the ground. But where's the real Hong Gil-dong? He's up on the ridge line. And he laughs and rides on to live another day. So that's the kind of adventure tale that Hong Gil-dong's story is. I mention it here because it's kind of a contrast to Hyo. It's the Hyo that hasn't worked out right, because his father doesn't allow him to be called father. His brother doesn't allow him to be called brother. And this is the idiom for the Soja. They cannot call father father. They cannot call brother brother. They're left in the lurch. And so this is sort of a contrast to Hyo. This is sort of a study of Hyo that's not Hyo. And in the end, where does he go? He sets up a new kingdom, a kingdom of the sea, out on an island, where he sets up an ideal society where there is no discrimination by class. So what is the story? It becomes a social commentary, a critique of Korea that's so concerned with class orientation that this is a counter to that story. And as it turns out, Hong Gil-dong, wait a minute, Hong Gil-dong is now the name that you fill in when you go to the bank and you have to fill a deposit slip or a withdrawal slip. Hong Gil-dong is Joe Doe, John Doe. So Hong Gil-dong is the name that you fill in. So everybody knows Hong Gil-dong. And is it filial piety? Is it loyalty? Well, it's social criticism that looks at filial piety and loyalty sort of turned on its ear. Okay. Well, that's Hong Gil-dong. Those are two stories from pre-modern literature that you can look at. Oh, and I'm out of time. Let me just go quickly get through some modern stories. There's Mama and the Border, Rainy Spell, Suffering of Two Generations, The Old Hatter, and Scarlet Fingernails. These are stories that have something to do with Hyo in them. Mama and the Border is a story that comes from this book of modern Korean fiction by a guy whose name is Ju Yo-sup. Yo-sup is Joseph, and it has a brother named Johann. So these are Christians, Joseph and John. And the story has a Christian connotation to it. Oh, I think it's translated by Bruce Fulton. The story is told through the innocent voice and the eyes of a 7-year-old girl, Oki. And she doesn't understand what she's telling you, but you do. For example, she gives flowers. Okay, it's a story of this widow who should be a faithful widow, right? We talked about the faithful widow. And so she shouldn't remarry, but she's Christian. So maybe she should remarry. And it turns out a friend said, hey, there's a school teacher who needs a room. You have your extra room there by the gate. Why don't you put him in there? And in the house, there's an uncle and grandma and the widowed mother and Oki, the little girl. And she likes the boarder. He's a school teacher, and he does art, and she goes over and works with him. And one day he says, hey, take these flowers to your mother. And Oki delivers the flowers. He says, I don't know why my mother got so red. See, Oki doesn't know what's going on. And then Oki says, one day, Mother started playing the organ. She hasn't played the organ since Dad died. And all of a sudden, you see what's going on, but Oki doesn't understand it herself. So it's a very interesting story that's told from the perspective of the innocent observer, the innocent child. And finally, the mother and the boarder talk, and apparently a proposal is offered. And then the boarder gets a transfer to another city, and mother has to decide, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Can I turn my back on Korean tradition and not be a faithful widow? Should I be a modern Christian woman who can remarry? That's okay. No problem in Christianity. And you can ask the following questions. Ju Yo-sup was a Christian. There are Christian motifs throughout the story. They go to church. They play the organ. The setup then is modern Christian values, remarriage, versus traditional Confucian values of widowhood. Which will she choose? Which do you want her to choose? You get yourself invested in this. And then she makes her choice. Did she make the right choice? Why or why not? And how do you feel about her choice? How did O'Keeffe feel about her choice? And what did Juliosop want you to feel? What's he doing to you as you're reading this story? So this is another one that's a lot of fun. The Old Hatter, I haven't got time to talk about, but it's a story of children making fun of a man who made traditional hats. The Rainy Spell is a great story. It's a story of two grandmothers. In the household, you can have one grandmother, but you don't have two. This household had two. It's in the middle of the Korean War. And each grandmother had a son, an uncle. And this is the innocent perspective, again, from an innocent child. This time it's a little boy who tells a story. And one uncle is a partisan, a Syngman Rhee loyalist. The other one's a communist. One gets killed. And there's all these emotions of jealousy, two uncles. One is gratitude. I'm glad my son survived. Your son got his. He deserved it. He was on the wrong side. All these emotions can come into play. This is a great story as well. Sympathy, jealousy. And what is the boy telling us? What does he know and what does he not know as he narrates this story? Well, we're out of time. Let me, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so that's it. If you look up any of these stories and use them, or want my advice or help on it, send me an email. I'd be happy to give you some pointers on it and such. But that's Korean, that's filial piety in Korean literature. Thank you.